The next session we put in this room on the main stage because of its significance. And in the last few months, the Foundation's phone has been ringing, emails have come into my inbox, conversations had about the disruption happening at NSF and beyond, and its impact on the computer science community. And over the past few years, I've had the pleasure of meeting and working with individuals you're going to hear from in a moment. And I consider them always just doing what they do, like this incredible work that pushed forward the research side of our space. And things have clearly become disrupted in these months, significantly so. Joey in particular, we've been on calls, and every Friday, the past few Fridays, there have been really tough emails to receive. So we've structured and curated very much with their help this session. Actually, our team had limited involvement, so we give it all to the 4 people who are speaking to you. My ask is that everyone have a moment to voice the thorny issues, but like I said this morning, to be as constructive as possible so that we leave truly with some ideas for how we might be able to plug the gap and kind of redirect how we address and continue to do the important work that all of them do. So I'll invite you, Carol, as our moderator, Dr. Carol Fletcher. Many of you know, the director of ESEP. We have Leigh Ann Delyser from SRI. We have Dr. Joseph Wilson, or Joey, as many of us know him, from the American Institutes of Research, and Kumar Garg, who is from Renaissance Philanthropy. And I will turn that to you.
Thank you, Kate. Appreciate it. I really kind of wanted that funky walk-up music because this is kind of a sad topic and we need to like bring up the energy, right? You know, so I'm just going to play it in my head. But thank you, Kate. As she said, we want to make this super interactive. So I'm going to do a little introduction at the beginning and then we'll get to our panel. But so the last 100 days, how about that? Thoughts? No, we're not going to open it up quite that wide, but it has been a doozy of 3 months. And for many Americans, for those of us who work and have dedicated really our professional careers to broadening participation in computing and STEM, it's been really particularly difficult, from the censorship of language to the canceling of literally over 1,000 grants and contracts that support the work that we do, has been a challenge really both personally and professionally. So the first thing we want to do is acknowledge that this has taken a toll on people. As Kate said, every Friday, for those of you who aren't on these lists, every Friday, emails come out from the federal government telling people, your grant's canceled, your grant's canceled, your grant's canceled. And that's happened at least 3 weeks in a row. So all of us are like literally every Friday, I'm waiting, can I make it to 5 o'clock without getting that email? So it's been very challenging. But today, we're going to focus not on reaction, but action. How are we going to respond to this challenge? And I'd love to tell you that we have all the answers. Guess what? We don't necessarily have all the answers. These are incredibly amazing, bright people. They have many ideas, but I think there's probably a lot of ideas out in this space as well. And so we're going to start off, and I'm going to give Kumar the credit for this. I've seen him do this strategy at other conferences, and it works really well. We're going to start off by doing a little crowdsourcing out here from you guys, okay? And I'm going to ask you some questions about how, I know not everyone here is a researcher, but many of you, even those of you who aren't researchers, are working on services to children, to teachers. It might not have been a research project, but it's getting canceled and unfunded, et cetera, also. And so we're going to start off by kind of crowdsourcing some ideas that you have for what are some strategies you're either right now deploying to navigate these challenges, or you're thinking about deploying and you'd like to toss out there to the ether and get some feedback from folks, okay? But when we do this popcorning, we've got folks with microphones. When we do this popcorning out, I'm going to ask you, your response needs to be in the form of sentences, not paragraphs. Okay? So what we want is popcorning responses. We want to get some idea generation. That's our purpose here, is generating thoughts and ideas. And then our panel will have an opportunity to respond to and discuss many of the things that you guys have shared, and also bring their own expertise to the table as well. Okay? So here is your question. Hold on a minute. Okay, so very briefly, what strategies have you been thinking about or already deployed to sustain your CS education research or services, given the disruptions we're facing in funding and the current socio-political environment? Thoughts? Anyone? Mike. All right, right here. The man in lilac.
Thanks. Hi, Mike Carlin, Cal State Dominguez Hills in Los Angeles. Even in California, like Carol said, we've been getting termination of funding notices. Our university leadership has advised us to move away from equity language, at least, even though that's the root of the work that we do. And so to answer the question, we've found that we have become much more intentional about the language we're using and knowing our audience better. So maybe that means relying more on workforce rationales than equity rationales in the funding requests that we're submitting and things like that. And it's a first step, but at least so far that has been a step that we've seen some positive action from. So excited to hear what other people have and hopeful to hear what other people have found successful.
Thank you, Mike. Anybody else? Anybody else? Charlotte, right over here.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Dungan from the Mark Cuban Foundation. Mark does primarily fund our organization. And so I'm in a place of stability right now. And I think those of us who are not subject to the great whims have a responsibility to take some type of action. I call them micro actions. So for example, I can't fund your research project, but I can restructure a job application. I am hiring now for early career instead of later career to try to take someone from your pipeline. And I've taken on additional summer interns from your programs. Those are paid positions. They're just something, and something is not nothing.
Thank you, Charlotte. All right. Anybody else? Did I see a hand in the back? Alexa, oh, right here, yes.
Jeff Branson, the Possible Zone, Boston. We lost $1.6 million in earmark funding in 3 weeks. And we went to our donors and we went to our corporate partners and we explained the situation and we said we have no intention of stopping the work that we're doing. Any help you can give us would be great. And one of the things they said to us was, would you concentrate on careers of the future? So to echo a previous sentiment, we're moving more towards the careers of the future focus, which seems to be a little more palatable in terms of its media presentation.
Okay. Workforce, careers, working with partners. Yes, Alexis.
Hi, Alexis Menacall-Harrigan with ISTE. One of the challenges we're seeing is a lot of the districts we might do professional development with, specifically in AI and ed tech, are seeing their own cuts with Title II funding in particular, or, I'm sorry, not cuts, but not having security in the Title II funding. So the thing that we're doing is with some of our smaller grants and some of our larger grants, working with the thought leaders or the organizational leaders to use them as a recruiting tool. So bringing superintendents together on AI professional development and engaging them in why this is more important than ever, and then using them as recruitment tools and to help diversify our funding as well. So we have grants to supplement part of it, but then turning around and doing a little bit of fee for service and trying to integrate research into those smaller district-based projects, for example.
So like diversifying your portfolio of funding so you're not dependent on simply grants. Yes, good. Yes.
Hello, everyone. I just want to bring your attention to a fund that was announced last week by one of my colleagues, Dr. Sonia Koshi, and it's a rapid response bridge funding program to support organizations that find themselves losing their NSF grants or them being canceled. The applications opened on May 2nd, and the full proposal deadline is May 30th and June 13th. These are grants for $25,000, and this is a partnership between the Spencer Foundation, KPOR, William T. Grant Foundation, and I know there's one other that I'm Sloan. So please feel free to take a look if you're not already aware.
Thank you. Maybe that could go out in a follow-up after the conference. Yeah, awesome. Any other thoughts? Yes, sir. He's bringing you a mic.
Mark Miller, learningtech.org. We're a nonprofit, and also Northeastern University. I had 5 graduate students who were scheduled to do internships in industry as part of their education this summer, and all of those jobs dried up rather abruptly with all these changes. They were all on F1 visas or similar with a 60-day clock, after which they would not be able to come back and finish their master's degree. So I offered them volunteer positions where we keep track of their hours, and it's a real job, but it just doesn't pay. That's going to save their jobs, and they're probably going to get some publication, get their name on some publications out of it. Best we could do. We're not the Cuban Foundation, but we appreciate the thought, and we're trying to do something similar.
Great. Creative solution. Very good. Any other, we probably have time for maybe one more. Any other thoughts, any thoughts about, we're thinking about this. Do you guys think this is a good idea? Does anybody have any comments on that? Jake.
Jake Baskin, Computer Science Teachers Association. I think a little bit we're thinking about this, and a little bit of a plea to those in the room as well, sort of building on what Charlotte said about what we can do. We are thinking about and looking at the ways we can engage Congress in making sure they understand the impact of the cuts that are happening, the cuts that are proposed. But to be frank, we don't have the same voice in those rooms as large corporations, as big funders, as folks that have teams of lobbyists working around the clock. We seem to be seeing a lot of those folks stepping back right now, and if you care about this as a funder, I would love to see you step up as an advocate and put policy power behind that as well, because Congress is going to be making some big decisions around what funding continues to look like, and it could be even worse in the next 2 years.
That is a really great point. We all have our strengths and skill sets. Some of us we really understand K-12, and some of it is we have people who actually are paid to be lobbyists, and that's generally not people who represent K-12. So great point, Jake. Okay, last one.
Hi, Josh Snyderman. I'm thinking that the language needs to change, but the work doesn't, right? We all have the heart for what we're doing. Unfortunately, play the silly game, but keep the work, the focus, the momentum, computer science for all, equity and education, and don't give up.
That is a great point. I have to quote my director of CS strategy at Epic, where I work. They can ban the words, they can't ban the work. And as long as we stay true to our values and our mission, we can continue to support students, teachers, and others who have historically been excluded from these opportunities. But we just have to be creative, not defeatist, and think about how we do that. And so our amazing panel is going to give us a few more comments about this. Thank you guys for participating like that. All right, we're going to start with Kumar, who is a little bit different in that he is somebody who has done funding, a funder, a philanthropist, and also worked in policy in the White House. So, Kumar, from your perspective, what would you say are some of the strategies we should be considering as we're moving forward?
Well, first, thanks for putting up with asking the audience. I thought those comments were awesome. I guess, again, all of this is very provisional because I feel like if you had asked me prior to the start of the new administration what would happen, I wouldn't have predicted a number of these things. If you had asked me sort of in November, I would have said, well, likely the path we're on is like a repeat of the previous time where there was a lot of like hum and drum, but actually most of the congressional proposals were ignored. Most of the budget proposals were ignored by Congress. Budget funding sort of continued apace. And we saw a lot more actually on the climate side. than we saw on anything else. So a couple of things. I would say, just to sort of building on the audience. So when I generally am giving advice, I sort of say it's important to break into 2 lanes. There's the harm reduction short-term lane, which is, smaller but faster, especially to donors, is the advice I give. And then there's the medium term, like how do we build out of this crisis lane? So I think in the short-term lane, I think, for example, the work that KPOR and the Coalition of Funders are doing around bridge funding is super useful. We did, when I was working for Eric Schmidt, we did a lot of emergency grant making during COVID. They were fast cycle, short, and they ended up making a huge difference. So I always say to people, like, in the midst of like a crisis or a lot of fog, small but faster makes a huge difference for organizational budgets. It just gives people time to figure things out. I've seen that in a couple different ways. One is just you go out to your grantees and you say, hey, here's just like an extension with money attached, just to give you like time. Folks can do that without doing a lot of additional strategy. They can go to their board and say, hey, can we plus up our grantees by X amount just going forward? You can also do kind of open calls that people can apply into. So I think that's one type of bridge. I think policy advocacy is another type. When I talk to folks who are sort of career folks inside the administration, what they will say is, the general line is, we'll cut until they scream. So I think the political economy of staying silent cuts the opposite way, which is if you just take the cut, then it probably wasn't that important in the first place. That's very different than usual politics. In usual politics, you don't, you're trying to not get criticized. But in a world in which that's like the prerogative, like if there's no complaint, maybe it wasn't that important. So I think making voice heard is important. And then I also think there are funders who are funding litigation. I think there are pieces. I think all of that is short term. And then on the second part, on the medium term, I do think that the language piece is useful in the very short term. I think that it is not a bridge to the future, which is just the thing that I've been telling folks is just that there's lots of reasons why folks are doing this work. Part of the reason we're doing this work is we actually think there's a big talent gap. What is the economy we're trying to build? What are the big challenges we're going to face, whether it's geopolitical, whether it's the industry of the future? You're all part of that. How are we actually going to, figure this out? And so we need to build a language that actually is what are we doing and why is it important? And that's going to require case making, because we have to build, we're at the beginning of this, but this is what the climate community and everyone else has gone through. That means in 3 years from now, this crisis is not going to go away, which is this idea that, trying to be inclusive as to who gets to participate. I think it's going to still, I think there'll be new players, whatever. So we're going to have to rebuild a political consensus for why this kind of work matters. And that's going to not just be taking words out. Mm-hmm. It's going to be just like the climate community built out a center-right coalition that talked about clean energy for everyone, built political momentum for clean energy in lots of states. That's why some of these clean energy tax credits might survive, is because there's actually a wide range of people who are fighting for it that are across. What's that look like for this body of work, where lots of people are fighting for it for lots of different reasons? And I think we don't have to figure that out today. But it's not just going to be we say some words, we don't say other words. We have to widen the coalition.
Awesome. Joe?
Yeah, I would just add to what Kumar was saying. I think storytelling is super important. I think especially as researchers, we often get siloed in just talking about the work in a very academic and traditional sense. And I think any sort of project that we have to be able to describe it to your grandmother. You have to be able to talk about the work in a way that people can understand the direct impact that it has, who it's benefiting, and why it's really important. And that helps both locally, that helps at the state level, that helps at the national level to help build these cases that this is super important. So just to give you some context, I'm sorry that you lost all that funding as well. I'm in a similar boat where I work. We've lost hundreds of millions of grants. We've laid off almost a third of our staff in the last few months, and hundreds of people. So the scale of this has a direct impact for the work that I do, and the colleagues that I work with, and many of the other people and collaborators that I work with. And so I have a moral imperative and prerogative to make sure that the work continues, because I believe in the idea of computer science for all. And I think telling the story in a different way is part of that. I think redefining how we describe what is the return on investment for the work that is funded, so new measures of ROI. So Kumar mentioned a lot about different models for research. Shorter cycles, I think, are going to be really popular. The way that we're thinking internally at AIR is we are imagining a world where NSF and US Department of Education funding are flourishes and not features. And that's because we need to diversify our funding, and we need to find different places to do the work that we're doing.
All right, raise your hand if you've ever had an NSF grant to help improve computing or STEM education. Leave your hand up if the most important piece of that work was the paper you wrote at the end of it. So let me ask you then, right? Were you doing research, or were you doing programmatic impact on research dollars? I think that's a really important question. Some of us were doing research, right? Like research, the point of research is the knowledge. The first consideration for review for the National Science Foundation is intellectual merit. And sometimes it's really important to write that paper, right? We discover really important things all the time. But this community, and this community especially, we have used research dollars to do programs. We have used, even myself, research dollars to build programs. How many of you have heard of CS for All script program? That was designed with $300,000 from the National Science Foundation in a small research practice partnership with 8 districts from New York State, including some very, very tiny ones from upstate, which are awesome. But we don't consider the impact of that $300,000 only the 8 districts. That was the last NSF grant until 2 years ago that Script got. With that $300,000, we have taken that program and touched 12, or I can't say we anymore, can I? CS for All took that program and has touched over 1,200 schools, 1,200 school districts in the United States, which is almost 10% of the districts in, but we stopped funding it with NSF because it wasn't research anymore, it was program. And I think we have to be really careful, like, because the research funding pulls back, it's not that we have to stop doing the programmatic work. We need to take the things we've learned and discovered with our research and look for the programmatic sources, which are highly diversified, often come in much smaller numbers, because nobody's writing you a $5 million check, right? We'll need to have, the most important thing will be the count in the world of the thing that it does, right? It'll be how many teachers and how many students and how many classes and how many districts. It won't be the how much did they like it, how much did they learn. It will be a different measure. And so I think what you said, where like research becomes the flourish, we can no longer, in a world where the amount of research grants shrink, the money available for pure or big R research, as we were talking about, shrinks. We don't have the luxury of using research dollars as a change agent to reform education. Because, and as much as CS education likes to think we're different, the billions and billions of dollars that have been poured into math education research have not fixed math education. The billions of dollars that have been poured into literacy education have not fixed literacy education. They've learned a whole lot of things. And science of reading is now coming from that learning. But it's not research dollars that's making science of reading go. It's programmatic dollars. We have to think about the difference between the two. And we have to diversify as a community the way we think about funding and the way we think about what funding gets used for what, right? I was sitting here before and talking to folks, and Chris Stevenson, when I first was working at CSNYC, which Chris Stevenson, yes, I was. Chris Stevenson, who founded the Computer Science Teachers Association and ran it for a long time before she moved on to Google and do other things. When we started CSNYC, Michael Preston and I went to her and we were like, how do you do this? Like, we're both new at nonprofit. He came from the New York City DOE. I was helping to start schools and had just come out of grad school. And she said to us, she said, find your Little League funders. We were like, what does that mean? She's like, look at the fence on the Little League field in your town. Who put a sign there? Right? Ask them for money to support your mentoring program. Ask them for money for the little things that make the programs go in that town, in that community, because this work is too big for any one funder to fund it. We have to, not just because of this moment, we have to diversify because it's bigger than we can fund from one source, even if that source is the National Science Foundation.
That's a great point. Go ahead.
I was just going to add, I think for the diversifying funding sources, I think part of this is like building new networks. And I think those networks are started here. I think I'm grateful for Kate for when I saw her in San Jose for the Impact Gala, how I was talking about all the cuts that were happening where I work and engage in a conversation. And we talked about the importance of building new networks because there have not been as many networks to have us all connected. And I think that's one way to start to build new ways of thinking about how can we do computer science education research. I also think, I had a thought and it disappeared. I'll come back to it in a second.
I wanted to riff a minute on what Kumar was talking about with like the language and kind of goes back to like knowing your audience also, like who are you speaking to, and maybe this shift in, we're talking about workforce development also and not just equity. And, you know, so I work in Texas. For 10 years, I've been doing this work in Texas. So this drama that we're feeling nationwide, sister, we've been doing this in Texas for a long time. And people are like, how do you do that? You know, and I say, well, I really focus on data. That's where I start. I don't talk about social justice because while that may be important to me, it's not necessarily important to some of the people that I'm talking to at the legislature. And when we talk about data, one of the things we've done, Texas is an enormously diverse state. And so we did an analysis to say, for all the 5.2 million students in Texas, which of those students, or what percentage of those students are female, Black, Hispanic, low income, rural, or students with disabilities? Those are all identities which have historically been excluded from computer science. You know what percentage that was? 92% of our students fit one or more of those categories. So the work that we are doing isn't about doing something unique and special for one subpopulation. This is what our schools look like. And if we aren't serving those kids, that's an economic train wreck for my state. And that's the language that I use when I talk to legislators. I say, do we want Texas to be a leader in the innovation economy? Then we should grow our own innovators. And 92% of those kids fit one of these categories. So we can't pretend like we're not serving those kids. And I have never, even in the deepest red portions of our state, when I've spoken using that kind of argument, have I gotten pushback. So it's been fairly effective, but it's because I'm not using words that mean something to me. I'm using words that mean something to them. I'm not selling barbecue to a vegan. Okay?
You're not writing for an NSF panel.
Right, yeah. So anyway, Kumar, you wanted to say.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I think that the Texas, so what was it that Tom Luce was doing around, what was it called, 2036?
Yes, yeah.
I thought that was really smart, right?
Yeah.
So Tom is a center-right Republican. He was like, how do I sell Texas on a talent agenda, right? How do I convince them to do stuff on STEM? How do I, and so he said, well, first let's start with like, well, what is Texas going to be in 2036? Right. Like, what are the industries that are going to matter back in that future? What are going to be the talent needs? And where are we on current, if like graduation rates, what disciplines people are going into, what are they getting trained in? And then he would walk in with that delta and say, are we giving up?
Yeah.
Right? Or are we like gonna have a plan? And I just think that like, if you take a step back, the current federal posture is like a giving up posture. We're gonna cut immigration and we're gonna not do anything to help kids get into these disciplines. And we're gonna win.
All the way.
Like it doesn't add up, right?
No.
So like you just have to connect these dots and say, these things cannot all be true. We can give up or we can try to win. And if we're gonna try to win, then we have to actually do things to actually get our kids ready. So I just think that like this has to be an affirmative agenda and then we can win. Like I think people are winning this at the state level, but it's gonna take like a bunch of work and then coalition building. I actually think like messengers matter, who the messengers are, and in what context, it matters, right? So the people who are protecting all the clean energy tax credits right now on the Hill, like are able to get those meetings because, they're like, look, I think this is really important and we're on the same side on other issues, that kind of thing. So I think on this question around like new networks, I think one thing that I'll just sort of is that, and sort of builds on this question around the Little League, I do think that one thing people make the mistake, at least on the donor side, is to be very narrow in what they think is the addressable universe of donors to go after. Mm-hmm. So I will often have people sort of list off, hey, here's the folks who I think could care about this topic, and I've emailed 5 of them, and I think like I didn't get a response, so I don't think that. And the big thing that just sort of having worked in this space, I've sort of noticed is there's just a lot of dry powder. There's community foundations. There's folks who are very early in their giving history. There's folks who are, they just have lots of different ways. And I don't expect individual PIs to figure this out. I mean, partly that's why we created Renaissance, to sort of build out a network of these donors. But what I keep finding is that compelling pitches work. And so I don't think that I don't think that's going to help us in this immediate moment, in the sense of that takes time. But I do think that widening the lens of who could care, rather than just sort of saying past giving history is prologue for the future, is a useful way to sort of like, how do we build out of this?
Well, I think it's also worth noting how a lot of the NSF funding started was for high school computer science was through a program called CS10K that had a very specific purpose of training 10,000 high school computer science teachers. It created Exploring Computer Science, it created AP Computer Science Principles, but that was a rallying cry for so many different projects, and I think of other collective impact models like 100K and 10, where I first met Carol years ago. Those are the kinds of things that I think get people excited. I think we're living in a space of trauma, and we have to come up with a new solution, and we have to come up with something that we have some hope in. And I think what you were just saying is super important, like having something for everyone to gather around and say, this is our thing.
Yeah, and I think, I'm so glad you said like collective impact models as you were saying that, because we as a community have been short-circuiting a bit. We've been talking about collective impact as a community, we've been saying, but we've all cited the same national studies that say like, oh, computer scientists look like this. White students, black students. White students, Hispanic students, right? Boys, girls. And we keep breaking students along those identity lines from studies that were huge and broad and across an entire nation. And we've heard both from those communities who represent one of those bars that they are not a monolith across the nation, as well as we're hearing now this pushback against like, well, it can't only be identity that makes the bars do that, right? And I think there's a moment here for us too to really say like, oh, how have we kind of leaned into available and easy to get data in a way that has informed our pitches, right? Because CS10K, about 10,000 teachers was not 10,000 teachers for Tennessee. It wasn't 10,000 teachers for high schools that were within a 20-mile radius of a college campus who were going to get a grant, right? It wasn't 10,000, there wasn't a condition on that. And so how can we kind of like go back to, and I still remember the targeted universalism work that happened in, I think it was 2021 or two, with ESEP. And targeted universalism is now being called Equity 2.0. So if you have not seen this work, I highly recommend you go and you take a look at it. And the idea from targeted universalism is you set a goal. What is the universal goal? The North Star, right? And includes, so prior to last week, I was running the Includes National Network from SRI, and we were resetting our North Star to be full pathways to produce domestic talent for STEM careers, right? And the full pathways is great because you can go as far down as you want into grades. NSF was really looking at building more K-12 into the Includes program and package. So we were like, how do we get there without having to be like, say, 10,000 things, right? So we were like full pathways of preparation for domestic STEM talent production, which is what Congress is using a lot right now when they're talking about workforce. And then asking ourselves, how do we measure it? And in that measurement, how do we not just do this for the things that are often referred to as identity? Why does it have to be about race or gender, socioeconomic status, ethnicity is the only way we try and decide who has privilege and who does not? And to be clear, we're going to find a lot of people who broke across identity lines and were in that lower bar in all the places that need more support. But we're also going to find out lots of other things about them too. And using some really good math, hopefully, maybe some clustered factor analysis and others, we may be able to find better ways to talk about the members of our community who are still struggling, not just to access, but to participate and to complete and stay in and on those pathways that we're trying to create for them. So I think there's this moment in time where if we want to like orient to the forward, as a community, we also have to do a little introspection. We have to recognize we've been a little bit like, look at the short bar, we're going to run at the short bar. Hi, short bar, that's us, we're doing that work. In a way that may not truly be representative of our community, the students who are clustered around us, the ones that we have access to, and the ones who need very specific, and from the universalism point of view, targeted interventions to open their pathways to success.
I think that makes me think of like this idea of also, you know, the CAPE framework we designed from the purpose of really looking at the whole ecosystem instead of thinking about how are we creating ladders and stirrups for individuals, interrogating the ecosystem that's holding us back from the success we could see in representation, participation, experience. So how are we addressing all of those systemic things as opposed to how are we fixing people? And while we need to continue to provide services for individual students, individual teachers, it is a Sisyphean task of pushing that rock up that hill if we don't change the underlying systems that to continue to shove that rock back down. And when we focus on those systems, it might be a little bit, I will say more palatable, but I think it's also more effective. I mean, that's the whole premise of the ESEP Alliance, which I serve as the PI for, which is really to look at what are those big policies in place that are holding us back. And many of you have heard about the math research that we've done in Texas, where we looked at, every kid in 5th grade and kids that scored quite well on the Texas STAR exam, their math test, and then followed all those kids up to 8th grade and disaggregated that data based on poverty, ethnicity, race, and gender. What we found was that even kids who had done quite well in 5th grade were not ending up in 8th grade algebra at the same rates as other kids, particularly low-income kids. Kids who had scored top 40% in 5th grade, why weren't they getting into advanced math in middle school and getting into algebra by 8th grade? But other kids were. Even in places in my own school district where I was on the school board, where we had opened up all of our seats to if a kid and their parents could pick to get in advanced math. We didn't put any barriers ahead. But what we had done was we had left it up to the children and their parents to make that decision instead of the professional educators. Why, as educators, were we letting kids who had proven they could do advanced math not take advanced math? Why weren't we auto-placing them? When we changed our policy and we said everybody that was in the top 40% in 5th grade, you're getting put in 6th grade into advanced math, 7th grade advanced math, and you'll take algebra by 8th grade, guess what happened? Those gaps between race and ethnicity closed tremendously. Those gaps between poor kids and rich kids closed tremendously. Why? Because we focused on a system, not just on the problem is those kids and their parents aren't picking the right classes for them. So that's I think a way of looking differently at the kind of work that we're doing in research also. So
Yeah, and I think if you had had your hand up for having done that would have been where the knowledge was the most important thing, right? The intellectual merit was the most important piece of that because it led to the argument that made the policy possible. So as we're going through, I think it's really important though to remember that we are not a monolith in this room. We are curriculum providers, we are funders, we are school district representatives, we are higher education faculty, we're policymakers, we're philanthropists, we are students, if they are still here somewhere. Yep. And we are a field. We are not an organization. And we all have a really, really important role to play. And so as we think about how do we, the whole thing, navigating CS education research in these unprecedented times, we each have a really important role to play, and it's important we all play different roles. We can't all do the systems change work. We can't all build the networks, right? We can't all give the money. We can't all be the ones who write curriculum, nor should we be. We can't all be the ones who run the after-school programs. We can't all focus on accessibility, although we should integrate the accessibility research into our work. But I think there's this, as we think about what's next, as we move forward from here, how do we really lean into what our expertise is, work with each other? And I think many of you who knew me in my previous role at CS for All, I never was shy about introducing someone to a funder that lined up with them. If we want to move the field forward, we have to help the momentum go to the places where it fits. I would have rather introduced a new funder to someone, not me, have them not give me money, but have them give money to CodeJoy, for example. Not that I did that, but just using them as an example, and I know they're here. But because it kept the money in the ecosystem. And so we have to, yesterday Stephanie Rodriguez said we had to stop collaboration as a community. And I think in this unprecedented time, we have to lean into that even more. We have to stop collaborative competition. We have to hold up the work of each other in addition to ourselves to move forward in a way that shows the world that this work matters. Because if we're like, oh, Carol, you should fund me over them because I'm better, we're going to make an argument for why their work isn't important, and hence part of our field is not important. We just have to be really careful about that. And we have to come at this like the work is important, the field is important, and it's going to be what it is. Because, like, as I think folks have said, like, there's no way that Infosys can fund us all. She can buy us all lunch.
Yeah.
She can't fund us all.
All right, we've only got a few
And we've gotta
minutes.
go.
I want to give Joey and Kumar a chance to make some closing comments also.
Sure. So since this was an AI-focused conference, one of the things that I did was I took the section or the description of the panel and I put it into Google Gemini's deep research. And I asked it, if you were on the panel, what would you say are like 5 key points that came out of this? And so here are the 5 key points that I thought were quite interesting. Forge resilience through diversified funding and collaboration.
You guys got that?
Redefine return on investment to center equity and systemic impact. Proactively adapt research agendas to balance innovation with foundational equity. Invest strategically in the next generation of diverse CS educators and researchers. Unify for collective action, advocate for policy, embed justice, and drive sustainable reform. I'll pass it over.
What do you need this panel for? I guess one, just on the tips and tricks, one that came to mind as folks were talking is one other strategy I've seen in donor pitches is just help me complete the project. So, folks have lots of different projects. I have seen donors sometimes being just open to being like, this is the amount, this is one of my priority projects. I think it's important because this is the gap funding I need to complete. So I have found that to be useful as well, just as like a very practical. I think the only other, on the talent side, I would also say that like, if there are ways that you can provide, like, I've got these folks in my lab, or this is their next step, sometimes folks are looking, and you can be a great advocate on their behalf to sort of reach out and say, hey, this person might be coming up in 2 months and is looking. That's another place where I think you can be a real advocate on behalf of folks in your lab.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for your thoughts. Thanks to the panel for their amazing thoughts. And thanks to Kate and Infosys for letting us have this conversation.